a new file. We're going to go to File, New. And in this class, we always name it last name, first name. Semester, this is spring. The year is 2014. The class is Graphic Design 3. And this is Project 1. All right, now we are going to make this 8 inches wide by 10 inches high by 300 pixels per inch. And I'm going to leave it in RGB color mode because you can always scale down from RGB to CMYK because it has many thousands more colors than CMYK, but you cannot scale up from CMYK to RGB. In the same way, we're starting with a 300 dpi image because 300 dpi is for print and 72 dpi is for web. You can always scale down from 300 dpi. You cannot scale up from 72 dpi. So I'm going to click OK, and you can see the image size is 20.6 megabytes. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my workspace is set to Essentials, and I'm going to click Reset Essentials. And for some reason, I should have resized my screen, but I'm going to go ahead and move all this over so you can see that. All right. So I've got my layers, my channels, my paths, my history here. And I'm going to place an image. So I'm going to go to File and Place. And I am going to grab the picture of my sister and I and hit place. And this is a huge file, but it scaled it to the image, so I'm going to scale it up. Now when I'm scaling, I'm holding Shift to make sure that it scales proportionally. Once I've got my image placed how I want it, I'm going to press Enter. And it is there. Now I'm going to zoom in. You can either press Z or to zoom, or you can just use the tool on the toolbar over here. Now you can see that it's a placed image, and I've got my little picture here. That means if I were to edit it later somewhere else on the computer and save it, it would update. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to have this only in this file. So I'm going to right click and choose Rasterize Layer. And now this is internal to the file. I'm going to delete my background because I don't need it. And I'm going to double click and call this layer Original. On my original layer, I'm going to take the Spot Healing Brush tool or press J on my keyboard. And I'm going to remove blemishes that are on my face and on my sister's face here. Now, you want to use the brackets on your keyboard to scale your brush up and down. You can always scale it up and down over here, but it's much easier and quicker to scale it with your keyboard. The reason I'm telling you the hotkeys as we go is because hotkeys can save you about 20% of your time. So let's say you're working for 5 hours, 20% off of that is 4 hours. You're saving an hour's worth of work. Let's say you're billing someone for 5 hours, but you're only actually doing 4 hours of work. Well, you've just made an extra hourly wage. All right, do that. So I'm going to hit Z, zoom in. I'm going to zoom in pretty close so I can get detailed on here. I'm going to press J, grab that Spot Healing Brush tool, and I'm going to scale down to just over the blemish sizes. And I'm going to just click and get rid of those. And I'm going to get rid of her hair. Now, in general, you don't want to drag too much with the Spot Healing tool because it can look weird. But for some of these stray hairs, I don't want them there. So I'm getting rid of them. There's a little mole above her eyebrow there. Click get rid of that. And you're going to spend a few minutes doing this. See how that cleans it up really quick? Get rid of things like pores, freckles. If you want to keep your freckles, you don't have to get rid of them. I'm just kind of going nuts. Now, places like this where it's like kind of a patch of red, I am going to click and drag around and clean that up a little bit. You just want to be careful because sometimes it fuzzes out the skin a little too much. You end up being kind of clinical about this, like getting down into like the breast region and stuff like that. It's like, where's the spot? All right, cool. Back up to the neck. You know, it becomes you're not even looking at where you are. And you want to kind of do this quickly. Don't spend a million years doing it. All we're doing is making sure that some of our larger blemishes don't show up when we smooth out our skin. So like that huge blemish right there, gone. This one here, gone. I just got this mole removed. Check that out, gone. That screwed up a little bit, so I'm going to step back in my history. There we go. Alrighty, got a little scar right there, getting rid of that. Now some of these you might not even notice. I notice because it's my face, so you'll probably be a little pickier on yours as well. Where you're like, oh gosh, did I have that horrible of a zit? Jeez. Alrighty. And I'm going to zoom out. And you see I've gotten rid of most of those blemishes, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of my layer by just left-clicking and dragging this layer onto my new layer button. And it's going to say original copy. I'm going to call that Airbrush. And what I'm going to do to this, pressing Z to zoom back in, just so you can see. And I'm going to zoom in on Mary's face since she's not wearing very much makeup. So I'm going to show you what we're going for here. So if you're going to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and you're going to basically just smooth out your skin until you have a nice creamy blend of features, right? You can turn off the preview to see the difference. See how that smoothed everything out? All the pores are gone. You click OK. Once you do that, well, that's a little too plasticky. So we're going to have to add noise back in. So we go to Filter Noise, Add Noise. And I'm going to use maybe 1%, maybe 2%. 2% is a little far. 1%. The darker your skin, the more noise you're going to add. The lighter the skin, the less noise. Now, let me turn off preview and you can see the difference. See how that plastic, not plastic, adds it back in? And click OK. Well, this, I want to be a mask on top of everything. I want to be able to see the features in the eyes, to see the individual hairs. So what I need to do is I'm going to add a layer mask to my airbrush layer by clicking this little add layer mask button down here. And white means everything is showing. Well, I'm going to fill that with black to temporarily erase everything. You can press G to get your paint bucket, or you can just grab it from the toolbar, grab your black, make sure that the brackets are around your airbrush layer. If they're on this layer and you fill it, you're filling things with black. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure you're on your airbrush layer. Fill it with black. See how it clears everything away. And we're going to paint our skin back in using a white brush. So I can press B to get a brush, or I can just go over to the brush tool over here. I can press X to flip my black to my white. And I can choose I'm going to use a soft round brush. You may want to use something with pressure to use your tablet. This is why using a tablet makes your life easier, because you can just carefully draw in everything. Now what I'm going to do is, while I have my white selected, I'm going to paint that skin back in. And you see how that's smoothing out features? Now I don't want to paint over my eyes, and I don't want to paint along the hard lines on my nose. If I paint over that crease in the eye, look how weird that is. Don't want to do that. We want to paint around that crease in the eye. We want to paint around the eyebrows so that you get to keep your eyebrows as opposed to have a fuzzy mess where your eyebrows once were. I'm going to use a smaller brush to go along the edges here and enlarge it to do the big spaces. Once again, going around my eyebrows, not going into my hairline. Carefully painting everything. I'm getting rid of those crow's feet there. Not that there's anything wrong with having crow's feet, just what you're doing is trying to flatter yourself the most. Not going over the hard edge of my nose, going just up to the edge of it. This is actually Mary's nose, sorry. Not going up to the hard edge of any features. I'm going to leave that crease in her face because that gives her some of her recognizable facial features. Not going over her dimple there because, once again, recognizable facial features you want to keep. Changing the bracket on my keyboard rather than using the brush toolbar up here. And those pores go away really quick. Don't paint over the side of the nose. If you do paint over the side of the nose, flip it back to white using X and paint it back in. Flip back using X and get rid of it. Don't paint over your lips because your lips have a certain amount of texture that makes them look realistic. If you paint over them, it becomes unnatural. Now I'm going to zoom out real quick and show you why this is a mask. So if I turn off that original layer, you can see I missed a bunch of spaces. Well, that's easy to fix now that I've got that layer off. I can make sure I have the white selected. And paint back. I'm using spacebar to move around on the canvas. And this lets me fix places I might have missed. And that lets me clean that up. Do the same for the neck here. I should have trimmed out that hair before I started, but not a big deal. All right, so just to show you the difference between the two, airbrushed, not airbrushed. See if I turn off that layer, how much cleaner she looks. But she still has pores and tones and features as opposed to, you know, just a mess. Now, if I want to change the tone of this image, like let's say I think it's too blue, I can add a photo filter, and I'm going to choose photo filter from the adjustment layer options here. And I'm going to choose that warm color. I'm going to adjust the density. And there you go. Now the cool thing about that, the cool thing about having that photo filter is that I can also double click on it again later and get the photo filter properties back. So let's say I want to make it really orange, I could. Or if I want to change it to sepia, I could. That's why adjustment layers are great. If I use the individual adjustment options, the problem there is it will only do it the one time. The adjustment layers let me do it multiple times. Now, there's a couple other tools I want to show you real quick. So let's say, for example, I want to darken her eyes. I'm going to grab my burn tool here, or I can press O. I'm going to choose shadows. I'm going to turn my exposure down to like 5%. And I'm going to darken the edges of her eyes so it kind of gives her eyeshadow or eyeliner. I'm going to darken her pupil, darken that crease. Same thing over here. But like, all right, that's made her eyes a little too dull. Well, I can do a couple of things. I'm gonna call this highlights, and I'm going to add those little bitty highlights back in that are already there on her eye. Do the same thing over here because I can. Those are a little too strong, right? So if I blur those, about 2%, and I turn them down, and I zoom out, see how much brighter her eyes got? You know, like, see the difference? Huge difference. Now, I'm going to make another layer. I'm going to call that whites of eye. And I'm going to paint in the whites here a little bit. Those are a bit too bright, but that's not important yet. Too bright, so I'm going to blur it again. I'm going to choose overlay. See how that brightens that up a little bit, but it's too bright. So if I turn it down, check out the difference. Punches it up pretty good. Now, if I'm on my original layer, let's say I want to make her lips more red. I mean, they're pretty red, but let's just say I can choose my sponge tool, choose saturate, and I can make them even more red. And I could take my dodge tool, and I'm going to turn the exposure down to about 4%. I'm going to choose highlights right here on those lips. I can punch up those highlights. And I can choose the burn tool, like I did before, to darken that line in her lips. Suddenly her makeup is much more strong. And that's just, I mean, but look at the difference between her face and my face, just with that little bit of makeup. Now you can also add eyeshadow if you wanted to. This is why layer order is important. See how I've named all my layers and given them, now let's say, all right, I want to do eyeshadow. grab my brush. I'm going to give her some brown eyeshadow. Bear with me, it's going to be really strong looking for a second. Like, ridiculous looking. All right. Well, eyeshadow is never one tone like that, right? It's got multiple tones. You've got your highlight and your low light, right? So I'm going to choose transparency lock here. That means anything that has been painted on, I can paint back on, but anything that's a transparent pixel, I cannot. So it means I don't even have to make a selection. I'm going to make a lighter color here. And see how it only paints on what I already made? I'm going to choose a shadow. I'm going to be a little careful with it. You know, like you would if you were careful with eyeshadow on your own eye. I'm going to blur that a little more heavily this time. All right, so that looks silly crazy, right? Like, so what we're going to do is choose multiply. And turn down the opacity. Oh my God. And check it out. I'm going to turn that off so you can see. This is why you can't believe anything in a magazine. So let's say I wanted to add rouge. You know, because she doesn't have any like warming cheek makeup on. I'm going to grab a pink out of here. Now, when you have rouge on, it's these warm parts of your face. That's your highlight, right? I'm going to paint down a little bit. And these are kind of the warm parts of your face, right? Darker pink. I'm going to choose to lock that transparency again. So it looks bizarre, I know. Blur the crap out of it. Alright, so some nice tonal changes. And you can use color or overlay or multiply is probably not going to look right, but yeah, so you want to use hue works pretty good. See the difference? You could also use saturation or color. You just want to find the option that blends the best. Soft light's pretty good too. But if it's always too hard, you can always turn down the opacity. So soft light's not too bad. And check it out. Makeup. So, no makeup? Well, augmented makeup. No makeup at all. No airbrush layer. Alright. Everything else added back in. All gone. Original. Added back in. See how much punched up that is? That is. So that's basically what we're doing. If I want to cut them out, let's say I just want to cut Mary out and put her on a new background. I'm going to go to my original layer here. I'm going to take my pen tool. We'll zoom out. I'm going to grab my pen tool and I'm going to, if I wasn't trying to do this quickly, I would carefully cut out Mary, but I'm not. Now when you want to change direction, you need to hold Option to cut off your anchor points so that they make those nice hard edges for you. Alright, so let's say I just want to cut out Mary. I'm going to go to my paths layer. Call this Mary path. Click OK. And I can either control click on the layer and say make selection, or I can go to this drop down menu here with the layer selected and choose make selection. I'm going to feather it as 0. And when I go back to my original layer and I hit my layer mask, it cuts everything out. Cool, huh? Well, I'm now going to place my background image, mountains. Now, this is why layer order is important. You want to move that behind everything, but I'm going to go ahead and scale it. Move it behind everything. And there she is in the mountains. How pretty. Now, I'm going to rasterize that layer. And I'm going to take her photo layer there and go to the layer mask layer and see how that's too hard of a line, really? If I go to filter, blur, caution blur with that layer mask selected, I don't want to do a 30 radius that cuts you out in like a crazy way. Do like 2, maybe 3. And click OK. And see how that softened her up on there? Now she looks a little more like she blends. If she still is not matching and the background's different, I can add an adjustment layer over my mountain. Let's say curves. And I can darken up the mountains. Now she matches a little better. And so that's really really heavily saturated, so I can also go to a hue saturation layer and I can desaturate the mountains again. And I could darken them a little bit more or lighten them. And if I feel like maybe it's a little too blue or too pink or too green, I can change the tone until it matches the lighting of my picture. Photoshop. I love it. Alright, once you're done with that, you should have been hitting save this whole time. But you're going to hit save. Save it as a Photoshop file for now, just so you can work on it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we'll be doing for our first project. Clean up, add some makeup, remove stuff. If you want to, you can turn yourself into a vampire. I don't care if you give yourself glowing red eyes. Whatever you want to do, have a good time with it. Alrighty.